I was gonna go outside and look in the window. Yeah.
Deanna? You want to sit here with your laptop? We have a speaker.
Yeah,
Move your
yeah.
chair over. Move your chair over.
I'll take notes.
Karen, I'll see you Thursday.
No, I was there.
Does that need a leg?
No, Greg will
Three
take
to
it.
one.
Yeah.
It was a majority.
I'm looking forward to it. The jazz.
I like the
With the high school.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So I
Skyview.
make sure like.
It'll be fun.
I'm just here for the food.
You gotta be kidding.
You're pretty wedding crasher, you know, I mean, dumpster diving.
Secondhand scenes are.
Where are you sitting?
I'm gonna sit there.
We have time.
You already did.
So do you work with Brandon? In the district who does data crunching? That person that's doing the data crunching on this, I heard from some of the task force members. Yes, I heard very good things about
She's the latest one, right?
Yeah, Megan. Oh, but she might have, I didn't follow through.
Hey, Alan, did we get
Work going
Nick,
on
that's
with
Wi-Fi?
the place.
We have a chair. Oh, no, that's you.
It's not Wi-Fi?
We have a chair right here.
Oh,
my God. Oh, my God. Like less than 24 hours.
I don't know how I landed on a note for Kathleen here.
Oh, okay.
Is that mine?
Yeah.
It's not for me, but it's a note for you.
Is it from Joanne? Is it the other part of Joanne's?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Angry.
Yeah.
Oh. Angry Karen.
Parents.
No, but I'm glad that you did.
How's everyone doing? Everyone has a spot? Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanksgiving dinner?
Right, isn't it? But I'm so sorry because
So I'm not sure who's leading this rodeo here. So anyway, this is the last topic on today's study session / retreat for the board, and so it's an opportunity to catch up with the Start Time Task Force, and particularly the subcommittee that's been really diving deeply into the modeling of what some particular options are that are to get us to the outcomes of Board Resolution 714 by 1718. So really hoping to use this as an opportunity to kind of catch the board up, and I know you get the minutes and you get all those kinds of updates, but in a more personal way with the workings of the group and where they're at and where they've been and where they need to go. And I think they're also hoping to get from the board as well some of your feedback, because as you know from all of your reading around this topic, there are numerous trade-offs and numerous issues that surface with any of the options and any of the models that are out there that I think would benefit from some candid and direct feedback from the board to help inform the task force and the subcommittee as they continue their work. I'll turn it over.
If we can, though, we talked about it in our board meeting about knowing exactly what the outcome and the desire we want to have for the meeting. So just trying to double check on that for we as the board. We want to give them, and do we want to interrupt them a lot during the discussion, or do we want to let them go through?
So,
We have a plan, we have a proposal.
Okay.
I think this works with your plan, but if we can go to this next slide. We kind of have an outline for the session, and we thought we have our task force members working in tandem on transportation operation and a section on the challenges and process, community outreach and timeline and additional information. But we've done it in chunks and sections
So we
and
can have a discussion
so we can have a discussion, so
after
get
each one.
through.
After each section.
Yeah.
Right, there's like 4 to
4 or 5
6
slides.
slides.
Thank you.
And
So we
then-
can try and hold our questions per section.
If that would.
That
Oh, I love
Thank
that.
you,
I love
thank you.
that.
Just let us know and then we can help you.
We'll call on you.
I love that, thank you.
Yeah,
And we have time at the end for a broader discussion.
yes, that was
Excellent.
part of our
Thank
work
you.
yesterday, that we wanted to make sure that we allowed, we're hoping a half hour. if
We have
can.
till when? When's the, just to check on that?
6.
6. So that's
Ish.
an hour and 6.
So why don't I get started, and first of all, thank you guys, and really thank you to this subcommittee.
Yes.
Let me do a quick introduction. So this is Nicholas, right, and Anna, I think everyone knows Anna, we see her a lot. Cheryl.
I'm sorry.
Nancy, Aaron, and then behind is really the master of everything, is Megan. So she's been doing a lot of the work behind the scenes with us in support services. Megan works for support services and has been really trying to support the committee and the subcommittee or task force as we sort through all of the depths of transportation. So a couple things we'd like to do first, as Carolyn talked about, is you can see our session outline is going to be somewhat simple, 4 to 5 slides. We want to just give you kind of our objectives, hoping to get into sharing a little bit of what we currently do today from a transportation operation perspective, and then kind of share a little bit of what we've been through in our process, because we're kind of going through the, oh my God, what do we do and how do we get here? And there's all the things that we're asking ourselves that maybe the board could help with some guidance. And then we wanted to just talk a little bit more about community outreach and timelines.
We've been working with Leanna and coming up with a plan on how to connect with our community and make sure that we get input and reach out.
Yep, and then we just wanted to share maybe additional information of what we've been seeing from other districts around us, the surrounding districts. And then maybe a little bit of sort of summary question and answers is kind of what we want to do. Okay, so maybe we can start with the objectives. I think for us there's 3 sort of main objectives that we want to really share with the board. The first one is just to share a summary of our process today and sort of what we've accomplished, where we're at, and some of the challenges that we have. The second objective we wanted to do is really ask the boards for some guidance. We have some questions, but we're not exactly sure what to do with these questions, and maybe open-ended questions the board may not be able to help answer today, but questions we should start thinking about as we start landing toward an option. Okay? And then the third thing we want to share is a little bit of the timelines that we've put together as a committee and the community engagement. I think those are the 2 things that we thought was really important. Is we know we have this quick timeline that we have in the next 12 to 14 months. We also know that we have a lot of work to do with Leanna around community engagement as we look at how do we incorporate our community to participate in this decision. Okay. So I just want to remind the board, as Larry said, in January 2015, we identified our board resolution 714. I want to really identify the 4th bullet on there in 715, where it's that the board of directors will sort of help establish some start and dismissal time, program, service level, fiscal parameters to guide the administration and district committee and task forces charged with planning sort of a later start time. So this is probably one of the guidances that we will be seeking at the end of the meeting.
Right, this is really what we're hoping for, a really great guidance by the time we finish with this task force.
So our stakeholder participants is quite large, as you can see. We have a facilitator, we have sort of a mix of participants on here from principals, teachers, administrators. We even have a student who's really good and really smart.
Amazing.
Yeah, and we have.
He keeps us on track.
Yeah. Our parents and community. I think he's the smartest guy in there.
Yes.
So this is the larger task force that we have. And one of the things that we try to do, because we're getting into a lot of detail and information, we formed the steering committee of this larger committee. As you can see in front of you, it's Carolyn, myself, Megan, and a facilitator, along with the 5 parents.
And they all volunteered.
Yes. They all raised their hands.
They all raised their hands. Why do I forget his name, the facilitator's name?
Spencer.
Welch.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. Yep. So, we've probably been meeting as a task force probably for the last 16 months. However, as a subcommittee, we've been meeting in between those times also. So we may meet with the task force once or twice a month, but on top of that, the subcommittee is meeting another 2 times a month or something like that as we sort through a lot of the
We started in May.
information. Yeah.
It just seems like.
We only started in May, we haven't been, we haven't been yet.
Sorry. Oh, yeah.
No way.
It's Hawaiian.
Hawaiian time. So the next piece that we wanted to share is we're going to sort of hand it over on the transportation operations to our community folks as they try to get the board up to speed, somewhat at the same level of currently what we do in power operations. Okay, so Nancy and Cheryl.
Okay, we're gonna tag team, because I'll do the next slide, is kind of our introductory to what our transportation finances look like. And then Cheryl will explain kind of what our overall transportation operations are, and then I'll come back and talk more about the money again. So this is kind of an outline of what our operations look like for the last 3 fiscal years in terms of how many buses and miles driven and number of drivers, and then the expenditures. As you can see, from 2013-14 to 14-15, it went up a little. However, in that time period, the state has moved to fully fund transportation. And I'll talk more about how that model, allocation model works, but you can see that our reimbursement last year was essentially 100%. So this year,
What we're missing on there is our program expected budget for 15-16 is 8.2 million.
yeah, I saw that, yeah. So it will be interesting to see if we still are 100% funded or not. I'll also be talking about this magical efficiency rating later, which is a different formula that the state uses and why it's important. And then down at the bottom is from the October 2015 ridership at each level, elementary, middle school, high school. These are the actual riders, not the eligible riders, so this is from the head count. And then on the right is the special ed.
So, for example, as Nancy talked about in the basic ed, actual qualifiers for ridership is little over 15,000 students. 15,000.
And we're only at
It's only like
8 actually.
60%.
Yeah.
So 5,000 could walk-ish.
15,000 students who are eligible.
Right.
Right. It's not walkers.
Because we have 20,000
We have
students
20 plus.
Right, that's what I'm saying, what is the 5,000?
Walkers.
Walkers.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
and then of
And then
the
there's special
50,000,
Yeah.
Walkers and drivers for high school, right?
drivers.
Yeah.
They're
Whatever
eligible.
drivers.
They're eligible to
No,
ride.
high school is
eligible
But they don't, yeah.
Yeah, but they're not necessarily walking.
So typically when transportation's going through their process of trying to determine who's eligible and who's actually going to ride, that's that month long, we gotta see who's actually getting on the bus and who's not getting on the bus. So, you know, we kind of go through this process of why is the buses so crowded, you know, how many stops do we have? And what we really don't know is who's going to show up each year. So that's kind of what we're trying to sort through those first 30 to 45 days of the start of the school year. The other thing that you'll probably see a little different in 2017 is with the boundary changes and with the grade reconfiguration, you'll see a shift in riders or eligibility based on moving up a grade, but your boundaries around your school will also change.
So this, the elementary assume will be less and the high school will be more.
Yes.
Cheryl will take you through the next few.
Okay, so, and you may all know this, but I'm going to assume you don't. So, the 4-tier transportation system is what we're running now. And the first one is high school, second one is junior high, and I'll try to stick to the same. We've been talking middle school as in future, so I'll try to stay with whatever I start.
follow you.
So, and then 3 and 4, early elementary, 4 is late elementary, and then various special shuttles, etc., which, the next slide.
What's significant about this is that it's an hour and 55-minute window.
Right, so this, an hour and 55 minutes is what this takes. That if you try to,
7:20, 9:15.
right, if you try to condense it, there's overlap. Which then we'll get into later on. So the next slide. So here's each tier. The high school, special ed, shuttles, McKinney-Vento, and out of district. So, and that's the fewest buses we need, is that first run, is 77 buses. Currently, this is all current, right? So this is why, this is junior high, right now, not middle school. So this is the runs there, and the kids, the idea is that they get there 20 minutes early, before the bell time, is what the goal is. So that's middle school, and this is where the most buses are needed, and then it sticks to the same level for tier 3, which is the early elementary, and then tier 4 and 5. Late elementary, field trips, everything up until they start picking up the kids and taking them home in the afternoon. Am I missing anything?
I just wanted to know why there's a tier 5.
Tier 5 is for some of our outside programs, so we have late programs, for example, we have special ed students who, based on their IEPs, can't start till a little bit later. So we have to accommodate some of our tier 5 students around that area. It's a small segment of tier 5, that's why we lump them together as tier 4 and 5. Right? But there's 4 major tiers.
Okay.
And I think what we wanted to share with this from a committee perspective is we're not just moving basic ed students and special ed students, but there's a whole bunch of other things that is sort of linked to these tiers as we transport our students around.
So, and then the first tier, 77 buses, then it swells up to where we max out is at the middle school, 114 buses, and then that's the number of buses that we use through the rest of the tiers.
And the clarification, I remember seeing the slide earlier, there's the 2 different kinds of buses.
Yeah.
And so, if I remember correctly, it seemed like there was a constraint. Right, for some of the buses, so, but I don't think we need to go into that, but there are 2 different kinds of buses, and there's constraints that
The
happen.
T buses, which are the larger buses,
Right.
and the D buses, which are
Right.
the smaller buses.
That's also a thing that happens.
So then, these are the pretty ones.
Yeah.
We'll go through these pretty quick. As you know, here's the 3 high schools. As you can see, it's quite evident that part of the challenge is the amount of land area that Woodinville High School has to cover, that the buses have to cover to get the kids to Woodinville High School. And then, once we get the 4th high school, this will all shift, but for now, this is what this is. So then, for the next one, these are the junior highs. Again, this side, the east side of the district, has the most has the longest runs, or I hope I'm saying runs, and not the right terminology, versus routes.
Both times.
To get, right, so the longest time to get the kids to where they go, to get the kids to and from school, and to cover the land. And then the next slide.
Excuse me, before I go, do those lines represent a bus, or are those just generic?
There's a generic.
Okay, thank you.
We off road.
That'll make it a lot easier.
Drive over.
The hovercraft, and we're gonna be. And then this last one is the early elementary are all the blue, which is the first run of the elementary run, so that's tier 3. Then the yellow is tier 4, which is the late elementary schools. So balance, so the buses are being used, they do an early elementary run, then they go and do a later elementary run.
understand that in 2017, all of this is
All
going
this
to
changes.
change. So what you see today is going to be a new baseline in 2017.
Okay. I'll let Nancy
Yep.
back to explaining the
Okay.
dollars.
So, as I said before, I was going to talk about our state funding. So there are really two different formula that the state uses. One is called STARS, the Student Transportation Allocation Report System, and another one is the Efficiency Reporting System. So what they both have in common is they take statistics about our district, our ridership for special ed and basic, our land area, let's see, I know there are 5. Average distance that the buses have to travel, and the number of destinations. Those are the big 5. And they put them into a mathematical model. In the STARS, which is what they use to determine what our funding will be, they take our characteristics and they multiply them by a coefficient that is determined every year based on the prior year's real expenditures of all the districts in the whole state. So those coefficients come out in February, so we can't really model even what we're going to get this year until those come out. But just know that the STARS modeling will change every year. So they make this calculation and they tweak a few things, and then they come up with an expected expenditure for our district. And then they compare it to what we actually spent, and they reimburse the lower one. So last year,
Of course they
okay,
do.
so last year, our STARS
That's a simplified version.
expended. You should see
Working on this.
Yeah.
Good job.
So the formula, the formula last year calculated about 7.5 million expected, and we are so efficient that we only spent 7.2. So we only got 7.2, okay?
In other words, you can't make money off this.
Yeah.
No,
Poker.
yeah. So the bad news is if we were to increase our service and hence our cost, we will still get the lesser of actuals versus this calculated modeled.
Which if we'd
cost.
spent 8 million last year, we would have got the 7.5.
Correct. So there is a cap, okay? So the other one is the efficiency rating, which you took those words off since last night. But I'll say them anyway, I know, just because we talked about them, and also because it's a board policy that you guys are gonna be voting on tomorrow, no, today, hours from now, that our efficiency rating should be 90% or higher. So what's the efficiency rating? It's really a way for the state to model, using a different formula, what they hope we would be spending. And I can explain it as, okay, it's a mathematical model, again using statistics about our district, including our actual expenditures. And then they compare them to a group of other districts that are similar in size and number of buses and stuff. And they do a weighted average, which is really the black box to me, how they come up with this weighted average. And they use that data to come up with a theoretical, hypothetical school district that transports the same number of students with less buses and you're spending less money. Okay, so it doesn't exist. It's not us. It's not a real school district. But they're comparing us to that. And then if we are kind of close to that, as much as I'm willing to say about their modeling, because it's like it's a 10-degree linear program. We're somewhere in there. We're close to 100%, so they give us 100%. We're slightly above what they're projecting for. Our hypothetical district was like a little over 7 million. We spent about 7.2. They're like, close enough, 100%. How much we can change and still get 100% is unknown. Yeah.
So here's a good example of that. Because Seattle School District is a school district that they can't compare to in-state, Seattle can only be compared to Seattle, which means regardless of inefficient Seattle may be, they will always be at the 100% rate.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the example that they gave. Now, the other,
I should take a picture of all the things.
now, the other districts we can compare ourselves to. So they're trying to look at some type of formula
Yeah,
that they can measure against each other and measure against what they believe should be the most efficient modeling, putting together through these formulas, and then that's how you gain your efficiency rating.
so right now it's a tool for us to look at to see if our operations are efficient, and for the state to kind of judge. If we drop below 90, they come out and do a little efficiency, I don't want to
They
use the
have
word
the right-
audit,
right
because that's a
to,
scary word, to help us become more efficient. But the original intent was to tie this to funding. It is not currently tied to funding, but there's the opportunity for that to become tied to funding down the road.
But currently it isn't.
It is not tied to funding right now. It's not a multiplier, so if you're 90%, you don't get 90% of the allocation. Still get full
That's good
funding.
information.
Yeah, you still get the full funding now.
Some people
We're
want
looking at
to,
that one.
but
Yeah.
if you're elected official.
However, isn't it true though that the state budget, the legislature allocates a pot of money for transportation?
Yeah.
So in theory, if everybody increased their services and increased their costs,
Yeah.
the state pot remains fixed.
Yeah, so like we've seen in the previous years, the OSPI has to go in and request a biennial funding for their
Right.
transportation. And in the previous years, they struggled to fully meet the 100% funding. So this efficiency rating is their way of trying to compare apples to apples for all 296 districts, and how they're going to start allocating who receives 100% versus 90% versus 80%. Right,
So that's, right now, a possibility,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
In the
that's not
future.
happening.
It's not happening currently because, the state is supposed to be fully funding, but
I think,
we all know that that can change.
yeah, I think the sense that we got from all of us talking to the OSPI key people there is that this model's so new that they're struggling to figure out how to link these things together and look at the small districts in eastern Washington compared to your medium-large districts who may have, who may be more efficient. So I think they're trying to sort through how they're gonna link that together in a fair and equitable way.
It's our second year, right?
Yeah, this is year 2.
Transporting 100 kids over 600 square miles, you
Yeah.
just can't be efficient.
Yes.
Right, and it's hard to compare us to that.
But right now
So-
it's not.
So one of the things that they talk about going into this efficiency formula is these key performance indicators. And I'm not going to pretend to know all of them. The 5 I mentioned for the STARS report also goes into that, and more of them go into that. But we wanted to kind of give you a gauge of where we are relative to some other districts. So total riders, we showed you our October count was like 8,100. This was 1314. It was about 82.
With the 6 numbers.
Yeah, it's the average of the 3 head counts, I'm sure. Yeah, 8247 plus.
So even though we may be the 10th largest district
Yeah.
from a student percentage, we're the 5th, we transport the 5th most.
So Seattle, Evergreen, Kent, Bethel. I didn't know Bethel was that large. And North Shore. Okay. However, we use very few buses because we pack them in. 120, we're number 2 in ridership per bus. Right? And then when they take into account our cost per student, which I'm assuming, Ryan, that was like what we spend in operations divided by number of students.
So part of the KPIs
Yeah.
is what they're measuring us against.
You can see we're number 2 in the state at $853 per student. Only Kent has a lower cost of $748. And you can compare some of our neighbors, Bellevue is almost 1,000, Lake Washington is a little over 1,100, and Seattle is 2,300.
And they use Metro.
And
Interest.
Well, but what, so,
This is just a state.
right, but what that, the reason Scott would be there is they're moving, the easier to move students are taking Metro and the higher cost, so they may be running a lot of single buses for special ed and some other reasons.
so this is an
So because they use
illustration,
Metro, that's probably why Seattle is really high on a per student.
and that's a perfect illustration how every district is different, right? We all have our own challenges with geography, where our schools are, where the kids are, where we have to transport them to. So these are some of the indicators that go into the program.
Questions, because we
Questions
just
about money.
finished this section.
If we need level one.
So, well, the other thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning is we are the Neiman Marcus of transportation systems. We
We used to be
provide.
Nordstrom, but.
Yeah,
Well, we decided that
now.
we moved up to Neiman Marcus. We're Nordstrom, providing the service of busing compared to other districts.
And what do you mean? You mean in terms of metrics, in terms of, you know, the service, the
The
different
the number of services and the number of kids we're providing bus service.
We offer more service than
And
we're
programs.
legally obliged to.
Yes.
4-star.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
That
decision.
we're providing a
lot of
very good
transportation.
service.
So those would be things like our shuttles
Right.
and
Yes.
our
Activity.
The buses for our band,
orchestra,
orchestra,
Yeah, all of them.
all those special
satellite
things.
programs, all
Right.
those kinds of things.
All
Ninth
these.
grade, the freshman academy.
the slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that surprised me is that you get funded, you get the money the year after.
Yeah.
It's like a tax refund, right? You do your taxes, you get your money later, even though you spend it.
Which is an important point, because if we raise our operations costs to do this,
The year later.
in the grade reconfiguration, our costs will go up just from that. If we raise them again for start times, we will have to budget for that in that year, because we won't get reimbursed for that for some time.
That is
Yeah.
Oh, when does the reimbursement come out?
It's a year later.
Year later.
There's 1 year gap.
Right, after the fiscal year ends.
And a question mark as to, you know, will the calculations change?
Right.
And will the cap level change, or will efficiency play a role?
Yes.
And they don't pay us a lot of our money.
No, they don't. There's no matching, no.
Sandy had a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so how much is 4 or 5, the polling lanes
Based on
impacting us?
last year's
And this,
That's Paul.
Yeah, that,
So,
good question.
there's quite a bit of impact, because if you look between where our district ends and where we have to deliver kids, they forgot to put a exit
Yeah.
and entry line
I get off
in
there,
that.
they don't have.
So what we've been working with DOT on is, could we have a sticker, so if we cross the double line to get off from one exit to the next exit, we don't receive tickets. So we're working with the DOT on that right now. So if you notice, it's a double solid line, I think.
You
from-
can't get off on 160th, you can only get off on 124th.
And the traffic is,
Yeah.
is that gonna impact our efficiency rating if we've now taken buses and put them on longer routes?
We're not sure. I think that's part of what we're trying to gather more information on. So the 405 change is so new that I think we're sorting that. The other thing that I think we talked about is 2017 will be even more new. So for us, we are saying whatever we think we knew today, in 2017, it's a brand new baseline that we're going to have to be working from.
Well, and in 2017, we shouldn't, I mean, in my mind, we shouldn't necessarily presume that there's going to be more transportation.
Yes.
There might be, like, I'm
Different.
thinking North Creek, right now, those are all kids that, by and large, up in that area of the district attend Bothell High School, probably large chunk of them bus, now they're going to be within walking distance, they're outside of bus service, or within the radius where they wouldn't get bus
Yes,
service,
they're
near
walking.
North Creek.
What we're-
But other boundaries might have more transportation.
Yeah, what we think is the number of buses will be real similar to each other, but in what region those buses change will vary based on the 4 regions we have now instead of 3 regions. And if you look at Bothell, today Bothell is in the south end of their service area, and we're picking up kids in the north end of their service area.
And then we have to presume higher enrollment as well, right? So that's probably gonna add some buses.
but full day kindergarten will take some of that out. because half day, you're running double runs, kind of.
Yeah.
So I think, I
But
guess when
each
I'm
kid's
hearing-
only being taken to and from school.
Right,
It's
but
two
you're
feet,
doing
kind
a
of two
double.
from laps.
And we actually.
But if you're a kindergarten kid, you're gonna go to and from school, whether you're a full day or half day.
But you're going twice instead of once.
The bus could be gone, yeah.
Right.
They
You don't
can
need that little
incorporate a
bus
bus
service.
run with some other shuttle service or something, so it's doing a full run of something.
So what I'm hearing is that changing late start time, changing grade reconfiguration, every time we change, we start kind of a new platform, and we don't, so when we do grade reconfiguration, we don't know what our efficiency rating will be at that point. We're trying to calculate it.
Well, we're not
But
trying to
we're-
calculate it. The modeling that you'll see in the process that we have,
I'm
we actually
ahead,
sent all of our information over to
What's that?
OSPI.
Yeah.
And we've asked OSPI to model that for us. So the information that we're getting back from OSPI is with a caveat. They're saying, today, this is what we think you guys will receive, or this is what we think you guys can receive in state reimbursement. However, that may change because the cohorts may change.
And from a board perspective, I think I would just suggest we try before, this sounds like it's pure uncertainty.
Yes.
And so you can't do much with, in decision-making with pure uncertainty, so it's just uncertain. So there's one of the other stuff that's more certain that we should decide.
No, that's not what I was trying to say.
No, that's what I'm suggesting, is I'm
Okay.
saying that all the efficiency rating, all stuff is what I'll call pure uncertainty.
Yes.
So it's not relevant for
But
your
anytime we
decision-making, because
change
you
the
can't.
model, this happens.
One thing,
You're going to something that you don't know.
one thing we tried to do, and you can talk, maybe for me it was very important when we started, all of our models, you'll see we have like 21, 22 models. They're compared to a base, which is the mythical what 2017 would be, knowing what we know now. We're not comparing, changing the time with adding this. It's like, let's imagine we're in 2017 and we add for school, high school and this, which is not reality, but it's close enough. That we're comparing orange to orange, or only comparing the change due to the start time, not. Now, you lose some of the accuracy because it's not real on today, but you have to make that leap so that you're able to compare things and not include a bunch of variance in it.
So we're at the next.
Right, yep.
Yeah, all right.
Blocks.
Here are the challenges in the
Challenges in the
process.
process that
That we've
It's
been.
not complicated. I'm the engineer, so. Also, my origin is I'm French Canadian, so I'll do a little French. One of the best quote I like is the Lavoisier, who was a French early scientist. Rien se perd, rien se gagne, tout se transforme. So nothing is gained, nothing is lost, it's all moving around. And that's what the block concept is. This is right now, there's 4 blocks, and it took me a while to understand that these are the start time in the morning. So there's a corollary in the evening, but just to simplify, I've got like 8 blocks. And the hour and 50 is the start of the first one to the start to the end one. And that's the efficiency of it's the, not the efficiency, but the, to make things work, there's enough time to go around and come back. Alec, can you go forward 3 slides to the, I'm cheating. The basic concept to you to understand is this. Whatever, and that goes back to the, basically, everything we're doing, all the task work is we're moving blocks around. So we can put 4 at the beginning, who gets to go first, who gets to go last, we can move that around. We can shift everything to the right, everything starts at 9 a.m. going forward or whatever, right? You can try to squeeze things, and that's where the squeeze of the money, so if you put 2 blocks, like a simplistic double the buses, buy twice as many buses, have 2 tiers at the same time, guess what, money goes up. And that's basically, in a nutshell, if you get that, you'll get the gist of our task. And that's only looking at the... If you consider, and that's only looking, and that's not fair, because it's only looking at the transportation. Once you figure that, you need to figure all the other stuff, like band and sports and teachers and students, right? Well, now you can go back. I just love that one. So, yeah, so this is what we have right now, and this is the board. The board is basically saying, hey, high school should start at 8 a.m. So the very first thing, you just slide this one over. Well, it doesn't work anymore, right? You're overlapping. Money goes up. And things. So then, go to the next one. So roll everything. So just take the 4 blocks, squish everything to the right, 40 minutes. So 8 a.m., 8:45, 9:20, 9:50. Well, elementary starts at 9:50 now. Is that an issue?
Yeah, I think it was
We
thinking.
have another one, I think, right? Is there another? Okay, and that's just, but then, all the malls will go after is that, okay, it's only the simplest, but every single mall, think of that, and just move the block, put it above, move it around, and that's basically it. So,
Wait, so. It's
And then
1 hour and
after-
55 minutes when you move it to a, oh no, you're saying that's still the time.
He's just giving the concept.
Yeah, it's just a concept. We'll go, the time will move a little bit.
Okay,
Of course, a 150 can't be like 10 minutes because it's physically impossible, but it could be 140, maybe 2.
okay, but you still need the hour and 55
There.
That's the.
It's a starting point.
You can do anything you want.
with 4
Yeah.
tiers.
Yeah,
Yes.
With 4 tiers, you need the
and
hour.
you'll see, we have a slide with like 21 blocks.
Funny.
So, you know, as we, I think Larry mentioned this, and we're all kind of sitting at the edge of our seats wondering, right? How do we build out our considerations, kind of the framework and how we approach this ginormous effort, right? Because this impacts every single family, no matter what grade your child is in. So, this wasn't my slide.
You do great.
Wing it, Anna.
So I'll wing it. So obviously, as a committee, as a task force, we looked at all the different considerations and parameters. A lot of conversations around a very large room. I thought quite, pointedly, it's at the transportation center is where we're meeting. So Megan has been working with the VersaTrans software, right? That's the software that you plug in all the different parameters and it spits out what the routing would look like. And then that's actually checked with OSPI to see what kind of efficiency rating we would receive with that. So the routing, we've manipulated a lot of different, timeline, right? And there are 21 models that we've looked at so far. Officially, we've considered, I think, much higher number than that.
Brainstorming the different.
Exactly, and then looked at also capital expenses, right, buses. We talked about maybe separating out even Woodinville, because we hear Woodinville is a problem child, because it's so vast. So does it make sense to have a secondary hub for buses, housing over in one of the properties that the district has on the east side of the district? And then, of course, buses. We've heard from transportation that not only does it take such lead time to order the buses, but hiring bus drivers has been a huge pain point, right? And that goes not just for North Shore, but throughout this region. So, you're just kind of swapping bus drivers. By the way, we love our bus drivers. So throughout all of our conversations in this large room, we went through an exercise of what do we hear, from our own household, to our neighbors, to our community, to our schools, right? So obviously we're representing a big population out there from different pockets of the community, as well as listening to all of our task force members, including the principals, etc. So it was actually a really cool exercise in that we listed out, everyone got to put out what they cared about, what they heard matters to anyone out there. And then the exercise with the Post-it notes, right?
The
We got
value voting.
Post-it notes and the markers, figuring out, what votes do we get, right? And it's really hard sometimes to narrow your voice, choices down to a handful because you want to care about everything. So these are what rose up to the top. So, elementary band and string programs, really important. Obviously, I won't read through all of it, but the impact on families, that was a huge point, right? Because especially if you're looking at elementary starting so late, they need naps by the time they get to school or a snack as soon as they get there. If you flip it, what happens, right? My, junior high students watching my elementary student, whoa, that goes out the window. What happens, right? So it's a big change. And then, of course, we went down to 7-period options, to athletics. That was another huge point, and really wanting to ensure that students don't miss out on their academic, the classes, core classes especially, because they're opting to do sports, right? So all of this, as it boiled up to the top, what we did as a task force decided, okay, what really matters? And studying, the first thing we did as a task force is we studied the research, right? The scientific research that I'm sure you all studied and referenced in coming up with the resolution. That's what we studied. And from that, the three key considerations we came up with is that it's our thought that middle school, the ages in middle school, are part of that adolescent group, right? So study shows it's really from the age of about 11, 12 to 19. So it was really important for us in defining what that adolescent age group was and decided to include middle school / junior high students in that bucket. The second key consideration is the athletic programs from junior high to, we talked about elementary athletic programs, not just high schoolers, right? But also keeping in mind that a lot of our neighboring districts are looking at late start time. So would Kinco make some changes? We don't know, right? There's so many unknowns.
I think it's safe to say, Anna, that most of the east side districts are looking at later start time, so I imagine that that will be an easier melding over time. However, there will still be some sports, golf, base, anything daylight dependent, where you're not going to have the option of perhaps making those kinds of adjustments of just shifting it.
Exactly.
And then there's the community user group aspect
Exactly.
of if we're on our fields later, community users are going to get on later.
Definitely, and those were all included also in the survey that went out as well. And then of course, that's such a nice way of saying that everyone has to share the pain. We have to, distribute the pain across, all fronts versus one entity kind of absorbing all of the pain. So that's our three key considerations, and we really want to, benchmark with you in figuring out.
And did you want, is this a time where you want more feedback on those three?
We can, yeah.
Or do you want to?
Oh,
Go,
wait,
did you
wait,
want to
why
wait
don't
for
we-
us?
why
But that's one of the questions you want, because I'm trying to find out what do you want from us.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna dog ear that page.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Let's go through the other.
Oh, so these are the 21 kind of the official options that we went through. You're also seeing kind of option 12, I believe. Was that the?
Okay.
Hold on, we have.
Yeah, there was no. So, slide. So we also explored 3-tier options, right? So looking at, obviously there are districts around us that are in the 3-tier option, 3-tier modeling. So 3-tier raised the prices pretty significantly, right? Sounds great, but it really raised the prices. So what's our, kind of our threshold for absorbing that kind of cost? Is that even a possibility, right? So
Yeah.
that's one of the big questions, right?
Option 12 was our make wood
Yeah.
go.
Maybe.
It was special.
Do a secession.
So I think the important thing here, as you look at the 21 options, is this committee here, along with the larger group, really explored a lot of out-of-the-box options here, besides just rolling and flipping typically what you see in other models. They looked at a whole bunch of different 3 tiers, who would start first, who starts last, what's the impact, how does this work?
Can we
And
share buses?
Can we share buses?
Yeah.
We sort of didn't put any parameters on our thoughts, it was
Yeah.
just throw it out. See what
So
happens.
one of the
Just
things
brainstorm.
that was important for this group is, as we developed the tiers, they wanted to know what was some of the impacts that was happening from transportation. So Megan and her team went through and tried to provide as much information as we could to have the committee then start looking at this as, okay, how do we get it from 21 to some more reasonable, manageable
Is this
number?
based on the boundaries for 2017?
This is
Okay.
currently based on the
Okay.
boundaries for
That was
2017.
I
my
think that
comment
makes a
earlier to
difference,
say,
right?
compare everything, assume everything's been decided, soon to
Okay.
be finalized.
Okay, next.
So from all this, we did narrow it down to 6 that we really did a deep dive in, and I think really it was about 10 plus, but this is where we landed. From here, we went through a whole, studies of impact and and kind of the ramification of these start times, and we narrowed it down to 3. So in doing that, you can go to the next one. In 3, we also did this as a subcommittee, and then we took it to the larger task force. It really did kind of the road show, if you will, of the 3 to, get everyone's take on what would this mean in your world, right? Because everyone represents kind of a different aspect of the community. And it was quite fascinating, right? We all came back and said, wow, they all suck. Frankly, they all suck, right? It was such a great exercise for our group to go through, though, to really learn not only the options that we thought were possible and the pain points that could we absorb some of those pain points, but I think for many of us going through this was a great exercise to understand the complexity of what we're faced with. And truly the 3, I don't think any of us really liked any 3 after we went through that exercise. So we have to go back, right? And we're gonna go back, but we
You
want
notice these
to
are all
get-
4 tiers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we settled on that because of cost considerations, really. And so the negative impacts that we learned about, I mean, we thought, we tried to think of all, the rest of the task force thought of more.
And it
And we
was,
walked out going, ooh.
and it was negative for every area
Yeah.
of schooling.
And
It was not specific to one area.
I would word a little bit, they all have something.
They all have something.
Then
Yeah.
they're, like, it's a different, because it's a very complex system. You're moving the blocks, you're moving things, there's always some, like, the first one, elementary ends at 4:25, it starts at 9:55, right? You've met the other criteria. The other one is like you're moving middle school and high school, so there's always, and that goes back to the other one, like those criteria with the third one, try to satisfy the most people positively. At the end, you're the board, you're gonna make decisions, someone's gonna come and complain, guaranteed, right? So we need to have the fact that we looked at everything, we tried to,
Guaranteed.
like, something, I was one parent that complained in the past for something else. That's why you're paid the big bucks, right? But, and that's why, for me, it's like when we want to show you the process, so that someone says, oh, they just came out with something. No, like we try to look, we try to get.
We spent hours.
Does this make sense, first of all, the nomenclature, what it means and all that?
Well, just a little, we had, not every one of these, but we had these sitting on the dais, so we're glad we didn't have, she said we did have 21 options. I'm glad you guys are going through this and vetting it.
Yeah, so this is kind of a good time to questions around kind of the challenges that they've gone through.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
so,
process.
something that would help us again, what Ken started saying is understanding really what would help you guys today as well as through the rest of the process. Because it is something, when we're dealing with, this may not be the case today, but in the past when we deal with complex questions, it is helpful for us to kind of go home and kind of chew on the data that you guys have been working on for months. So if you can help us really scope out what would help you today.
That's our summary page.
Yeah.
You're jumping
So that's just kind of a procedural question, and I have a whole bunch of these cost questions, and I don't know if that's inappropriate, if it's now, if that's ready. I mean, at what level do you, for me to start prioritizing things, I might start asking about costs really quickly, and I don't know.
Do you want me to give you like a brief summary of how I looked at some of the costs so far, like just what we did?
Well,
with-
why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, what's your
What we
question?
did with routing?
Yeah,
Question.
if I can frame one piece before that, that you said that these 3 options that you came to suck, to some extent, they have soft points, okay?
I think they
One
all
way or
suck.
another.
Right,
And you're going back
Well,
to the table, right?
right.
Change,
Yeah, you're going back to the table.
Right, and I just mentally, hopefully, we're at that thing that in some sense, there's a column over here that says status quo, and the status quo has been rejected. So the fact that,
That would be one of the options you're.
well, I don't think that's an option, is
Oh, you
going
mean
back to the status quo.
Okay.
And so
Oh, that's
even
what
though
we wanna
these
know.
3
Yeah.
suck, at
Well, the
some
board
levels of
board
variation.
resolution is try to make it start after 8. So status quo would be, no, board, don't do it. So that's up to you, right?
I understand, but I think if the mental frame I would ask you to consider is that the current system has been rejected and that the resolution is to come up with the least sucky of the programs that for some various stakeholders. But there's a mentality of, since these all have pain points, therefore we can't go with any of them.
No.
And I think that's, so I just mentally, I think we have to say, choosing and mitigating
Yeah.
the
So-
pain points is
That's all we
a
have
mental.
criteria.
Right.
From our perspective, right, so, because early on in the discussion, you know, in forming the task force, et cetera, someone made a comment about, well, you know, do we look at cost? Well, maybe let's not look at cost, let's come with the best model, right? But really, we don't want to do our exercise and spend all the time we're spending in a vacuum, right? We don't want to bring you, 3 options and they all, for whatever reason, you're like, yeah,
They all
no.
cost
No,
$20
they don't,
million.
right?
Yeah,
So that's what we want to avoid, and in doing that, we really need some parameters, right? Kind of the threshold you're, you know, you're
Are we
willing to
self-censored or
consider,
something
right?
like-
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our
I
word.
think that's,
I really appreciate so much. I know some of the people on the board are Leader Start proponents, and so the fact that, I think that's great, because going through this exercise and seeing where these different pain points are. And I think the fact that, first of all, you've taken, it sounds like everything, and Ryan too, and put it all in there and said, what is every single thing that we could do? And now you're like, now we don't know what to do. So I think this is really great to hear, and I don't hear that you're going, I hear that we're moving forward.
Oh,
and it's
definitely.
how do we move forward?
As far out of the box as we could.
And, yeah, no, I see that, yeah. And I'm wondering too, and this might be an inappropriate time to say this, but getting some of this on the website to communicate, I know we're gonna go to community outreach, to communicate where we are at right now, I think is really good for just my perspective, kind of let people know where we are. Because I appreciate knowing where we are.
All our PowerPoints and all our.
Or is this on the website?
On the
Okay.
website under start time task.
Okay,
Maybe
that-
we
I
can
didn't
kind
look,
of
so-
just finish
Yeah.
one more, kind of let us share a little bit of where we are with the timelines and community outreach. Because this might help kind of the process, process. So who was talking about
This is
Okay.
fun and-
this?
There it is.
Sorry. So, we have actually discussed in our smaller group and a little bit on our bigger group. Because we've all watched community outreach and, some of the other processes that the district's gone through. And wanting to be in the community, talking to people. So, obviously, right now, we're doing the survey. And it doesn't close until the end of this week. We spent a lot of time writing the survey because there's varying degrees of information and we didn't know how much to put out there and how much to just gather information without specific information, just to hear people's considerations on whatever level of schooling they were at. So we were really hoping to hear the ones maybe that we didn't in our bigger group and our smaller group consider. And so that's what we're waiting for, for the survey to close. And there's over 3,000 responses so far. I was really, as an elementary school employee, excited by, and it's not perfect by any means, but the bar graph shows there's a lot of responses from someone with an elementary school student. They may have a junior high and a high school student, but when they click the box to fill out the survey, there's a big chunk of elementary. So that makes me hopeful that people are paying attention.
And some of those respondents, though, may have answered more than once.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They
On
were,
this one. So
they
3,000, not 3,000 people, but you,
So you
3,000.
have 3,000, over 3,000
Responses,
responses.
yeah.
Yes,
So-
which is 3,800.
Yeah, no,
Oh, 3,800?
oh, what?
Nice.
Just for perspective.
And we actually can look at the IP address, I mean, they could be using different computers, but I didn't have one that said
Well, and-
20 responses.
And
No,
you
but
may
if you had
have,
a junior high and elementary.
Yeah.
people.
right, and you may have a
Yeah.
staff
We want it
person
all.
that entered, that did the survey once thinking as staff member, that also is a parent. So they
Yeah,
went back in and took it again, thinking as a parent. So, different perspectives.
So the purpose was you couldn't